Hi everyone, Charles from The Food People here, and I hope you're all keeping safe and well. It's my great pleasure to welcome Matt Chatfield, founder of the Cornwall Project. So welcome, Matt, and thank you for joining me today as part of The Food People in Conversation With. At The Food People, we're very clear about why we do what we do. We're champions of change, driven every day by our intent to shift the future of food and drink by harnessing the power of trends. And this In Conversation With series is all about talking to other people, businesses, brands, entrepreneurs, change makers, to find out more about why they do what they do and how in their way they're championing change and shifting the future of food and drink. Matt, welcome. Good to have you here today. Could we just start by talking about, tell us a little bit about what it is you're setting out to achieve with Cornwall Project?
I think for me, what I've always looked to do is basically, for about the last 12 years, dedicate my life to helping livestock farmers. I think they're a part of the community that sort of, haven't been treated particularly well, and it's pretty sort of in quite a silent way. So for the last 12 years, I've, been trying to work out ways of doing that. So what I'm now actually doing is farming. But if you want me to start, sort of the 12 years ago, that's probably, might in some ways be a sort of an easier place to start.
Yeah.
And that sort of gives you an idea of then why I'm actually doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah, definitely go for it. Give us a potted history.
So basically, I come from a farming background. So I'm actually, even on the Cornwall Project, we have two small holdings. One is in Cornwall, where I was actually born, and the second is in Devon. The one in Cornwall, my mum actually bought about sort of 40 years ago, started a small dairy farm. But the one in Devon has actually been in the family for 400 years.
Wow.
So we've actually, my family's farmed it for 400 years, maybe even longer. Because it was such a small farm, it's only his was about 80 acres. My granddad, I don't think anyone could have worked harder. He had a dairy farm. He was at the age when, it was like feed the country after the war. He was given a lot of resources by the government to drain the land, use fertilizer, plant ryegrass, farm in a way that you could produce a hell of a lot from the land, but probably not my style of farming. Anyway, so, but as he got older, we never really encouraged us to go into farming because he realised, I think he could see the writing on the wall for small holdings. So we just weren't encouraged. And I did love it, and I used to help mum milk, and I saw her farm slowly, get smaller, and then that closed. And my granddad. So I basically went to London, did publishing for like 10 or 12 years. Lived a fairly hedonistic lifestyle, and quite enjoyed myself. But then I suppose this is when the serious bit happened. So my granddad then got ill. And I suppose I was, living life in London. I knew he was unwell. I came back 2 or 3 times, but not as often as I should. So, it's something I would always deeply regret. But then about sort of 6 years later, my nan got very ill. My nan I was very close to. So then I came back, and I actually spent a huge amount of time with nan, when she wasn't very well. And during that sort of stage, I just sort of started to rethink and think, I probably needed a kick up the ass anyway. But I thought, I need to try and do something for farming. So I sort of then, she wasn't too well, I've had conversations, and I started thinking. So I sort of came up with 3 ideas, and I thought what I do after this, I will dedicate myself to, livestock farmers. I will, do something to look after mum and the family at one stage. That's what someone now wanted. And then the third was that I would basically get the farm up and running. And at the time, the sort of promise I made to my nan was that I would make it one of the most famous farms in the country, which I'm a little bit embarrassed about at the time because my thoughts on fame have changed quite a lot, but that was the 3 promises I made. I suddenly thought, right, I need to dedicate myself to farming. I somehow need to get this farm up and running, but I just didn't have a clue. I wasn't a farmer. I'd done it before, I sort of, it is in my blood a bit, but, that time, no chance. I didn't really have the finances. So I thought, right, the only way to do this is that I need to actually create a market for like high quality meat, because that's, our farm is suited to livestock farming. So I just thought, right, so I basically approached my local butcher, a chap in Launceston called Philip Warren, well, actually his son, Ian Warren. So I said to them, look, I know London really well. Why don't we just work together and see if I can actually start supplying restaurants with your meat? And it was like a crazy idea. And I had no idea about meat or anything. So I basically went back to London because I'd moved, obviously I moved to Cornwall to be in now and stuff. I moved back to London, and just basically approached lots of restaurants and said, look, I think I literally was phoning up some of the best restaurants in the country and saying, look, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but I think my Cornish butcher might be quite good. You're interested in having some? And so it took about 1.5 years, and it was a restaurant called Chez Bruce that really kept us going. A chap called Matt Christmas used to bully me a lot, but without them, we wouldn't be where we were. And then it just suddenly started happening where this group of chefs started coming back from like places like Noma, and there was just this new breed of chef. Like for example, like James Lowe from Lives, I think you guys know, Isaac McHale, Brett Graham was around. You know, you had people that suddenly some of them would come back from Noma. They were really into where their produce was coming from, and not, you know, some people really claim to be into it, but some people are really genuinely into it. And suddenly I was turning up, and they were hearing about me, and I suppose the pivotal moment was Tom Adams, incredible guy, like did pick you, and he was, you know, basically this little blonde-haired kid who was about 22. He got hold of me and said, Matt, you know, I hear you, you know, can get meat, and you know who your farmers are. And I'm like, okay. So I went and met Tom. Literally, he asked me 3 questions I can answer, and I'm like, I said, I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's go down to Cornwall. You know, we'll drive down, and you can meet my butcher. As soon as he met my butcher, like, you could just see they were just looking at the carcasses, and there were different cuts, and they were instantly working out how to balance things. And you could see my butcher was like, just, you know, it's the first time they met like a really forward-thinking, you know, chef like this, and that was the start of it, really. So then we just started this thing where we just brought down loads and loads of chefs, and it became a bit of a club, and we just became better at knowing who to work with. We just started, you know, I just knew if I was going to bring someone down, they had to have empathy. They had to meet my butcher. They had to understand that we have to run a business. You have to run a business. We would do everything we can to help you, but you need in return to know that we need help. You know, like, you know, we need, it needs to make economic sense for us to come up to Cornwall, do all these deliveries. So then it just aimed this idea of basically me trying to find people with empathy and good business sense. Obviously, I did have this, you know, idea of Cull Yaw. So I don't know if hope that sort of explains.
Tell us, because we've tried Cull Yaw, are a huge fan. Wayne, you know, Wayne's getting meat sweats. He eats that much Cull Yaw. So, tell us a bit about the inspiration behind Cull Yaw. What is it about, and why? And why you're kind of taking this forward?
Great chef called Michael Harrison, who's now doing great things with Super 8, like the guys behind Brat and you know, Smoke and Go. But he was my head chef. I was doing deliveries in London, but we had someone doing the trunk, you know, taking it from Cornwall to, you know, London, and I would pick up and deliver. So I was doing, you know, I was still delivering and doing the pub. That delivery guy, his father-in-law was a farmer looking to retire, but he was still looking to do something. So it was actually his father-in-law said, you know, why don't I buy some old sheep and then, you know, put them on grass, fatten them, and then see how it goes. So we got them, and then we basically, because we just ended up putting them in the chiller at the Warrens, you know, put it in there for about 5 or 6 weeks, and basically then we started, you know, serving the whole of it for Sunday roasts, and it went really well, and it was brilliant, and it was obviously a brilliant product, you know. But so I basically locked myself in a houseboat and just watched YouTube literally for about 10 or 12 hours a day, just popping out now and again. And it was all really, the inspiration was I saw a podcast by a guy called Alan Savory, but I could see 3 threats coming our way. And the first one was obviously the plant-based community were getting louder and louder. The environmental aspects, you know, the sort of the effects of ruminants on the environment, you know, with methane release. And then rewilding was something I knew nothing about. And the first thing I saw was like a TED talk by a guy called Alan Savory. But he basically said that the answer to the world's problems is that, you know, we actually need more grazing, more ruminants, but we need to do it in a, you know, in a different way. And then I realized there was this terminological, you know, regenerative agriculture, which essentially was using ruminants to improve the soil and to sequester carbon, do all these things. And I basically spent a lot of time in Extremadura. So every summer I go to Extremadura. There's incredible, it's very lucky. Basically, it's the best ham on, you know, suppliers in, you know, in Spain. I looked at their system, and basically what they were doing, you've got animals that are probably about 18 months old. They're on the Extremadura, the Dehesa. They're just scrounging for a living. They're just walking and walking. And basically, if an animal walks a long time, then basically that's how you get flavour into the muscle. Yeah. So these animals, and also they're going through periods of starvation where, you know, they're just scrounging for a living. They know what it is to be hungry. And then they get to about 18 months, and then they're put into the acorn fields. And so they weigh about 80 kilo. They've walked around a lot. Their muscles are really stretched but flavoursome. And then they basically put on 80 kilo in about 4 months because they just gorge on these mushrooms, and it's got oleic acid. It's just incredible. So I saw this and I was like, right, so basically you've got an animal that's walked around a lot. It's gone through periods of starvation so that, you know, it's known what it is to be hardship. So when it actually get something to eat, it's going to go crazy.
Yeah.
And then I just suddenly remembered what we'd done with the sheep. Like, I was like, wait a minute, like, sheep are actually, they get to about 6 or 7 years old. They've walked far further. They've actually probably had a better diet. They've had grass for the majority.
Yeah.
Like, and that guy used to just put them on beautiful grass and fatten them. And I was like, I actually think that system could be better. Like, I was like, so I spoke to Mum, and Mum's one of those traditional farmers who's like they just love everything the same. They love, like, the red rubies are stunning. They love fields that are grass, you know, it's all rye grass and it's all lovely. Everything's beautiful, like manicured. And I was like, right, Mum, I've got this idea. I'm basically going to buy, like, really old sheep. I'm not going to fatten them. And she's like, no, Mum was brilliant. She was like, okay, we'll give it a try. We'll give it a try. So I basically decided to buy them. And the word Cull Yaw is, because a lot of it I do is for, like, you know, essentially to keep promises to my nan and granddad, is Yaw is the name for you, but the colloquial term in my part of Devon. So when I grew up, it was always Yaw. So I said, I'll call it what it is. It's a Cull Yaw. So what a Cull Yaw is obviously it's the ewe. A farmer will replace 15% of his flock each year. So say he's got 100 sheep. He'll go through the 15 and 100, and he'll look at their udders. He'll look at any that were difficulty lambing, any that he just doesn't think are healthy enough to lamb again, and he'll basically pick those away. It is about 15%. They end up going to a market generally. So we ended up this time last year, probably last April, we ended up with 50 sheep in our fields, and they were all wool. They all looked dreadful. They all looked like the worst looking thing. Because when, you know, after like 5 months, the sheep, this wool is just, whatever sheep is, it looks, you know, it just looks terrible. And I basically, what my principle is, I make sure every day for an hour I watch sheep eat and do what they do, because I think that's really important. So I put them in fields, and I was just basically sitting down every day with them, like watching them. And what I was noticing was they were just eating a lot, and they were eating trees and leaves, and they were eating, they were just eating and eating. And I was like, okay, this is quite interesting. Anyway, then basically we had to get them sheared and weighed. So the shearer came along. So she started shearing them, and like there was first one came out, and this sheep actually looked like really plump. And then the next one was like really plump, and then the next one, and basically like all 50 looked really good.
What happens from a Cull Yaw perspective when it comes to aging and those types of things? Tell us a bit about the kind of eating qualities of
yeah. Well, yeah, this is the remarkable bit. So Ian Warren is my person I deal with at Philip Warren. You know, he's the one taking over the family business. But Philip Warren is just an absolute genius. He's one of those guys. He was like born in the council house, took on the butchery for, you know, and he's done it for like 50 or 60 years. You know, he's one of those people, if he did anything, he'd be a genius at it. But luckily for us, he decided to do butchery. So he just knows so much about how an animal works, how you put fat on, how it tastes. So I went to Philip Warren with this idea, and I said, look, Philip, this is the one thing of doing is, he said, that's a brilliant idea. And I was like, what? He said that, I think that's a brilliant idea. And he said, and what's really good about it is that after 5 or 6 years old, like a sheep produces lanolin from its glands, and it goes in its wool, and that's what waterproofs it.
Yeah.
But after about 6 years, they produce a hell of a lot less. So when you get that like tacky lamb flavour, that's basically lanolin. So you just associate that. So what we did, we basically age it, and we've worked on the aging process. So we obviously the animal gets killed, and then we put it in normal humidity for 3 weeks. So big humidity for it. So it's just basically relaxing the meat, probably about 4 degrees. And you're just getting all the enzymes fired up, and they're basically breaking down the meat in a nice controlled way. But they need moisture and they need warmth, and, you know, to be able to really work. And then after 3 weeks, then move into a dry aging fridge where we basically start taking the moisture out to build up the flavour. Yeah. So basically, like, you know, I had this Cull Yaw. I hadn't even tasted it. I took it some to London, and again, I'm sort of thinking of what it would be like. We took it to a guy. Well, I took it to Lyle's, and we took it to Okoye. Yeah. And Jeremy Okoye basically tasted it, and you could just, like, it is just the exact opposite of what you expect, because it's aged, it's really tender. Yeah. And all it just tastes of is pure lamb or pure sheep. Everybody's got an incredible palate who's had it. You can just see that they're expecting one thing and then they get another. And it is just a revelation. And Jeremy, he said basically, you know, he's traveled the world, he's got an incredible palate. And he said that it was already the equal of Hamon and Wagyu. And I was like, so then that was really exciting. So I thought potentially we got something really special here.
Definitely. Tell me about the farming system. I'd love to hear more about that and how it works.
I saw a talk by it was on Silvopasture, and I didn't really know what to do, so I just went along this talk, and There's a really quietly spoken guy from upstate New York, and Silvopasture is essentially using, basically it's what they used to do, but using trees as a way of grazing animals. So you basically graze animals in woods.
Yeah.
And there's a chap called Steve Gabriel, really quiet spoken conservationist. Now he's a farmer in upstate New York. And basically he had a load of sheep, and it was a real horrible drought conditions in his fields. So he had no choice but to stick his sheep in the woods. Yeah. And they thrived. And because in the woods it's so secluded, the hose system works, the soil works, everything works. So his sheep absolutely thrive. So he's then basically pioneered Silvopasture and talks a lot about it. So my confidence was low. Like, how can I try and compete with farmers? How can I ever think I can farm? So I went down to see Chris Jones, and Chris Jones has been doing it for a long time, like 50 years. And I got sort of a friend of a friend got me a meeting. I went down and I was quite nervy because he's just, someone with huge charisma, and just a larger than life guy. And as soon as I got there, he said, right, I'm not going to waste your time. He said, right, I'm going to sum up everything I've learned in farming in 50 years in one sentence. What do you think? And I'm like, okay, like that. And he said, if you look after nature, the flavour will look after itself. And I was like, almost like hairs on the back of my neck going up now, because if I look at nature and basically try and get nature working, then naturally that will mean that I can get flavour, And I'm like, so then I was suddenly like, I think I can do that. So then since then, it's been a question of how do I work with nature and the sheep? How do I get the sheep to help nature, and how do I get nature to help the sheep?
Yeah. And
quite clearly, Silvopasture was the thing. So I basically approached Mum and my stepdad, who's part of the farm. And I said, Mum, right, we've got this land. It's been in the family 400 years. I want to plant some trees. And Mum's like, no way. I'm like, right, okay. And I could just tell she, And I was like, right, okay, which is fair enough. You're planting trees. It's just going to change. But we basically had a 10 acres of wood. We called it MASH. And basically, I think when my granddad was given incentives to improve the land, he drained it, and all the water from there went straight into this area of woodland and just totally made it into a huge bog. And I suddenly just saw the wood, and I'm like, I might go and have a look in there. This is quite. I came to a bit where there was it was dry and it was a clearing, and I was just looking around. And I was suddenly like, wait a minute, I think this is ancient copies. This is Silvopasture. I don't need to worry about the fields. I basically have got a complete Silvopasture. I'm just going to have to work quite hard sorting it. So that was the whole Chris Jones thing, and it was just all these little things. So as soon as I realised I had, this was only in November, and I'm like, shit, right, okay. I basically just cleared a section, did coppice what I hope were hazel trees. I'd say semi-coppice, and the reason I've done it is to create light. So light comes down, and then you just get an increase in biodiversity. But the main reason I've done it is I believe that you need to have sheep grazing all year round. I think it's very important. This is where I get a bit crazy, but I think, for example, the ground gets very wet in the winter, but if you graze it really carefully, then you can. I think it's particularly important to get the worms. You need to basically feed the worms. I mean, this is all things related to regenerative agriculture and stuff, so it might be a separate subject, but essentially the coppice is there originally, either if there's a drought, so if we have a drought, I can stick the sheep in. But for me, more importantly, if the fields are too wet in winter, they actually call it a poor man's barn. Like one crazy story, we had a sheep called Hopalong. He's still alive now. He's a wether, so he's been like a castrated male. And he came to us last year with the worst foot. We were buying terrible sheep, and his foot was in such a terrible state. And we were doing all sorts of things to try and heal it. And it got to November last year, and it was just, you just wouldn't go. And I'm like, we're going to have to, he'd become a bit of a pet really, but, he was in pain. I just didn't want it to go on any longer. But I thought, right, so we just, anyway, at that point, I stuck him in the poor man's barn for about a week. And when Hopalong went in, he was this little sad little disheveled, just sorry state of a sheep. And then I went in there a week later, and there's this sheep looking at me as if it was going to kill me, literally stamping its foot. And I'm like, I haven't got a sheep like that. And I was like, shit, that's Hopalong.
Yeah.
So within 1 week of going in the coppice, I think there's crazy stuff happening with bacteria. I think they've got a choice of diet.
So what's next for Cornwall Project? What exciting things are on the horizon that you can tell us?
So what my big idea is, I think I want to break down the barriers of entry to farming. So my mantra at the moment is, if I can do it, anyone can. And I don't mean that in because I'm proud of what I've done, and I know I've worked hard, but at the same time, all I've done is listen to people and learn. And I generally think if I can do it, anyone can. I think land is going to become available. So what I'm really going to try and do is I'm basically putting a proposal together for an organisation to basically look at my wood. Let's farm it in a traditional way. Let's learn woodcrafts. Let's learn how to graze. Let's do a PhD study on it. Let's see if I can actually make money from it. For me, what's interesting about myself is, like, I'm coming from an angle where I know I can sell a product and I know it's flavour first. And so most farmers can't do that.
No.
Like, I can't farm. Like, most farmers can farm. But so now I'm in a unique position where I know I can sell it for a decent price.
Yeah.
So I want to show that my system works. I want to show that we can help biodiversity of everything. I want to show we can get flavour. I just want anyone, I don't want anyone to think that they can't do it. I want, you know, whoever you are, if you live in the city, wherever, I want you to think, maybe, you know, actually I can. So it's quite an ambitious aim, but
using that analogy then, if you were to catapult yourself 10 years into the future and looking back, what do you hope to have achieved in that time?
I mean, obviously my promises that I made, I would hope that I've done, you know, that would be my main thing, really. You know, if I've kept those, then that means everything else is in place. Like, we've got about 100 members of our family in the same graveyard. Everybody's in there. And one of them is yeoman. So basically our family were yeoman. Yeoman, Y-E-O-M-A-N, which is basically like, you know, working on behalf of a big estate.
Yeah.
So I'd quite like Yeoman on there, Y-A-W-M-A-N. So I think if I'm buried in there and it says Yeoman, I'd actually be quite like that. But if I can use Cull Yaw, like, and again, it's very specific to that part of Devon, if I could use that to get a lot of young people farming.
Is there anything else you want to kind of tell us about?
Yeah, I suppose, I think, I mean, you know, so I you know, dealt with a lot, you know, top chefs in the country for a long time. Just a lot of them are still friends. We still, you know, I still work with Warrens and help them. And I did have a restaurant for 2 years. My personal opinion, you ought to really think about. First of all, I do think, I work with a restaurant called 28 Well Hung, and they basically started working with us because we're getting everything regenerative agriculture. You know, we can show that we're actually, I mean, I'm part of a study where we show how much carbon we're actually sequestering with our livestock, and it's fairly obvious that we're putting far more carbon in the soil than they're giving off. So I think I think that will be a big food trend where people will start looking at the sort of the actual measurable links of what their food getting it is actually doing to the, you know, the soil. And I think what you'll start realizing is, this sort of leads on, is the more you look after the soil, the more nutrients you get, the more it works. And those nutrients then go into plants. Those plants, you eat the plants directly.
Absolutely.
Or you or the animals, ruminants, eat them. And obviously ruminants have got a rumen. The whole thing is they ferment stuff, they break nutrients down. We can't. There's a reason we put so much effort to have animals living with us. There's a reason, you know, like, they were vital for our evolution. I almost feel sorry for ruminants because they are so vital. But my thing is, we've just got to give them a really good life while they're here, because they, you know, without them, I think we're in huge trouble. But we've just got to, you know, it's a moral conundrum, but, you know, I think that's how I feel, really.
So that concludes this episode of The Food People in Conversation with Matt. On behalf of us all at The Food People, thank you for joining me today. You've given us an absolutely fascinating insight into your farming systems and how you are thinking about shifting the future of food and drink. It's been a huge pleasure to talk to you today. So thank you for joining me today in The Food People in Conversation with. So do join our TFP community for the details of our latest In Conversation with episodes, as well as the latest free to access food trends foresight. Visit thefoodpeople.co.uk and complete your details at the footer of the page. On behalf of Matt and myself, thanks for listening to The Food People in Conversation with. How are you shifting the future of food and drink?